For decades, buying music meant acquiring a physical object. You held a record, studied the sleeve, and read the liner notes. Then the industry traded all of that physical friction for digital scale, dissolving the physical record into an infinite flowing stream of data. To make this scale work, streaming platforms spent 10 years actively stripping away the context that used to surround a song. The artist interviews, the studio photographs, the written scores, all of it was discarded to make the delivery system as fast and lightweight as possible. What remained was the naked MP3, a single audio file completely isolated from the creative world that produced it. This isolation was a deliberate economic strategy. Stripping music down to its absolute minimum viable product allowed streaming companies to house tens of millions of tracks on servers, scale infinitely, and dominate the market. The platform successfully trained an entire generation of listeners. We learned to value frictionless volume, trusting algorithms to feed us endless playlists, rather than seeking out the artistic depth behind any single track. Then, recently, Spotify sent an email to its artists. It led with a massive number, an $11 billion payout, but tucked underneath that shield was a mandate. The email claimed that listeners want to go beyond pressing play. They highlighted that fans want depth. They want to understand your story and feel closer to the world. Curious, the platform is now demanding world building and storytelling from its creators. Yet this is the exact same company that spent a decade actively eliminating those very elements to build its empire. The undisputed champion of the naked, context-free audio file is suddenly begging for the friction and closeness it worked so hard to destroy. Why would the company that killed context suddenly pivot back to the depth it previously erased? This shift identifies a limit to the frictionless model. The company has realized that while audio files get people to press play, only depth keeps them from closing the app. To see what actual artistic depth looks like, we have to look back at a small, defunct Swedish label called Stone Rain Music. Stone Rain Music operated differently, treating depth as inherent to the music. They sold scores, artist interviews, and photographs alongside the audio, bundling them into a single unified piece of media for the same price platforms charged for a naked audio track. But the label didn't survive. They had the right instincts, but the wider ecosystem was busy building the stripped-down, high-volume streaming model instead, starving out small ventures that prioritized wholeness. Stone Rain Music represents a path the industry didn't take. Its failure reflects an ecosystem that was optimized for frictionless distribution over artistic context. The problem Spotify eventually hit is that naked audio files are commodities. When you offer the exact same commodity as Apple and Amazon, you cannot generate deep platform loyalty or retain users for long periods. Notice the grammar of obligation: your story, your music, the world you build. The burden of producing depth falls entirely on the artists. This depth feeds directly into Spotify's retention metrics, which are then packaged as pitches to investors. This version of depth is engineered after the fact. It's a content strategy layered on top of the streams, like frosting on a generic cake. While the defunct Swedish label treated depth as a sign of respect for the wholeness of creative work, the streaming giant treats it as a manufactured tool for engagement. Spotify didn't discover depth. It discovered that artist-generated depth is highly useful for feeding its own engagement funnel, which brings us back to that $11 billion. It is a real number, and the platform deploys it effectively to deflect criticism. This chart shows how that $11 billion is actually distributed. The vast majority of it flows to a tiny handful of major label artists and legacy catalog owners, whose streams number in the hundreds of millions, leaving a microscopic sliver for the long tail of independent musicians. For the composers and independent artists who make up the bulk of the platform, the underlying economics remain completely unchanged. They are still paid fractions of pennies per stream. Independent artists are now expected to produce more content, build bigger worlds, and reveal more of themselves, all within a financial system that refuses to compensate them for that extra labor. By requesting that artists share their story, the platform is asking creators to manufacture the very depth it previously commodified, converting artistic intimacy into a metric for platform retention.